Welcome to this week's RSAI Capital Recap video. I'm Margaret Buckton, your RSAI professional advocate. The primary topics for this week, we're going to talk about the school funding proposals and differences in SSA between the House and Senate, the one-time payment for in-person instruction, they've got different ideas about that too, and a deep look at the SS schools on the list and the relationship to vouchers. Well, the SSA discussion began this week, and the Senate approved Senate File 259, sending it over to the House. The House has House File 438 on the calendar for debate Thursday evening. Senate File 259 in the Senate sets a 2.2% increase in the state cost per pupil, adds $15 per pupil to close the formula gap. That combined brings up the floor to $7,218 per student. They grow transportation by $768,000 to get every district down to the average. And 141 districts will still be left on the budget guarantee at this level of funding at $28.6 million. Their total funding all in is $50.6 million, and that's assuming that the $15 million cut to the AEAs will continue. On the House side, it's a slightly higher proposal. House File 438 sets the cost per pupil at 2.5%. They put a little bit less into closing the formula equity gap, but still close that gap by $10 per pupil, so their combined cost per pupil is $7,234. The Transportation Equity Fund is grown by the same SSA amount of 2.5%. Their proposal leaves 135 districts on the budget guarantee for a total of $25.9 million. Their total funding all in, net of that AEA reduction, is $61.1 million. So as a result of those two proposals, registered opposed to the Senate and as undecided on the House as it falls short of our 3.75% request. When we look at the history books, how does the fiscal year 2022 proposal stack up? Looking back 13 years to fiscal 2009, of course, $3.4 billion in the state line item will be the highest amount of money invested in public education in history. Every year is the highest, usually, as inflation will require a little bit more. However, looking deeper into that, a 2.5% increase is the third highest in 13 years. $61.1 million if the House wins out, and the total dollar amount would be the 10th out of 13 years, meaning toward the low end. And that still leaves our average investment of state dollars $34 million. Below that 13 average, about $95 million is the amount that is typically allocated for the increase for schools. And the question for you, do students need more, and how do you best advocate for that with your legislators? Well, one of the key differences in the funding debate is on the one-time funding supplement. It's known as the Qualified Instruction Funding Supplement in both the House and Senate, although they'd have disagreements on how a district gets qualified for that. In the Senate's bill, Senate File 269, they roll this in with the SSA proposal. It's $65 per pupil. It's one-time miscellaneous income in fiscal 2022. It's based on budget enrollment. And to qualify, a district has to never have been out of compliance with Senate File 2310, the DE, and the governor. That would exclude Des Moines Public Schools, although they now have an agreement with the state that will catch up all of that instructional time that was spent virtually before they went into a hybrid compliant plan by the end of the year. That total amount is estimated at $29.4 million. If Des Moines were included, you'd have to have another $2.1 million on the list. On the House proposal side, instead of having an amount per pupil, they start at the total funding amount, $30 million. And in House File 439, a distinct bill, they appropriate this money for the current fiscal year, so you'll get it in the spring if they win out. Within 14 days after the bill is signed, a district will be required to report to the Department of Management the number of days that you had for full-time instruction at more than 6 hours a day. It's defined as full-time instruction if it was offered to all students. It has to be between August 23rd and January 29th. It's district-wide, does not account for differences in buildings. So you may have had elementaries in full-time instruction, but high school still in hybrid. You'd only get half credit for a hybrid day of more than 6 hours. You'd get no credit for a hybrid day of less than 6 hours. And you get half credit for a day of less than 6 hours, say you had an early release on a Wednesday or something like that. The bill is currently in the House Appropriations Committee, and I think they're sincerely bent on making improvements to it. The House Subcommittee Chair in the Education Committee said, it costs more to provide full-time in-person learning, and we want to compensate for those additional costs. I'm not sure we agree with that assumption, but you can certainly share with your legislators what the costs of either virtual or hybrid learning have been to your district. But the other concerns we have are just in the mechanics of the bill. Some schools started before August 23rd. Some schools have days after January 29th that'll be made up, such as those in a trimester situation or those making up time to be compliant. There were closures due to the derecho and construction issues which prevented having in-person learning. Some districts went into a waiver for virtual learning based on high COVID positivity. There's no consideration of a calendar based on hours, even though more than 2/3 of our districts have those instead of days. And certainly there were costs incurred to facilitate virtual or hybrid learning. Well, next steps is a great time to advocate with your legislators to better understand what all school districts have been going through since school started this last fall. A simpler distribution formula is better. Tallying days and reporting in order to have those funds prorated will be another bureaucratic exercise you're all going to have to go through. But virtual days and hybrid days had additional costs too, so it may not be worth the effort. All school staff have made heroic efforts to meet students' needs this year, and share a story with them of somebody in your district who made that difference. The funding formula principles really should be driving this school funding choice as well. Adequacy, equity, and property tax relief are the primary principles of our funding formula. If they simply put the $30 million into the formula, that would be the best solution of all. But absent that, distribute the funds based on enrollment to all districts. The last primary topic we want to talk about is Senate File 159, a voucher update. Remember, that's part of the governor's bill that got through the Senate. The vouchers or Student First scholarships will be available to students incoming into kindergarten in a school on the ESSA list or a student that's attended 2 semesters. Public money follows the student to private schools with no public accountability. So we thought this week we'd dig into that list of ESSA comprehensive schools and share some of the information we found out about them. Iowa's bottom 5%, which is what these 34 schools comprise, is based on test scores from 2 different tests. We had the old Iowa test in 2018 and the new Iowa test in 2019. No test at all in 2020. 13 of the 34 have made enough improvement to move off the list. And the policy question for all of you is which schools will replace them? Maybe one of your schools will be on the list next time. Once a district has been on the list and a student gets a voucher, they keep that voucher because prior voucher recipients are defined as eligible as well. Well, some of the demographics of these 4 schools are up on your list. You'll see a concentration of poverty, ELL, and students with IEPs. 12 of the schools have diversity plans. Half are urban, half are rural. This is an interesting point. The average graduation rate of these schools is 87.3%. 4 of them have 100% graduation rates, and 10 have rates above the state average. So maybe to think about it this way, if Iowa's bottom 5% of schools comprised an entire state, they would tie for 24th in the nation based on graduation rate. And that means that a low-performing school in Iowa is doing a lot better than maybe a low-performing school in Mississippi or Oklahoma or many of those other states with poor graduation rates. The list, of course, based on test scores, gaps between subgroups, and the direction of the trend, all of which would be challenged in districts that have demographics that are outliers compared to the rest of the schools that are in Iowa. This doesn't impact your district, so don't worry about it. If you've heard that phrase, I think that's exactly wrong. Who's going to be on the list next year? And we're all in this together. We should support public money for public schools. We last wanted to talk about the financial impact of the voucher. The fiscal note by legislative staff shows the cost to the state of $5,270, and school choice advocates have said, well, the rest stays with the public school. That's wrong. You don't get the money unless you count the student in your enrollment. You lose not just the $7,048 regular program district cost, but about $1,100 per pupil for all of the supplements, another $350 for Dropout Prevention Authority, another $538 for Instructional Support Levy Authority. All in, the average school would lose $9,036 per pupil lost revenue. That's just the regular program. You lose another $1,000 in the SAVE fund, plus the additional weightings associated with the students. You also don't know if you've got a special education student that goes to the private school, maybe the AEA will have to provide resources to support that student, which would potentially increase your special ed deficit. The cost to the state of the voucher is $3 million, but it's revenue neutral to the state. However, the cost to public schools is over $6.7 million lost. Well, good news this week. It's nice to see that the SSA debate, even though the numbers are lower than we would ask, that it's progressing and looks like they'll get it done by the February 15th deadline. House File 438 is on the House calendar for debate Thursday evening. We've seen the amendment. Well, they will raise the Senate bill's amount, take out the $65 per pupil, and then send it back to the Senate. So keep up the good work in connecting with legislators about the costs of following CDC guidance while providing in-person instruction. You'll have the weekend to work with your legislators about the one-time funding sources. Coming up next week, we should see discussion on how that qualified instructional supplement is going to work. You can see your weekly report for additional details. Your Advocacy Action Task List this week. Breaking through on the priority of public school is going to be tough. There's all kinds of email and social media from both sides going to legislators. They are inundated with emails. So if they haven't answered your email, don't get upset about that. Just find another way. Maybe write a short letter, leave a phone message, send a text message, find a way to schedule a Zoom meeting and have a conversation. Be respectful and share one more thing you learned this week, and keep at it every week until we have this whole thing behind us. Keep talking about SSA and preschool funding in particular, since you don't have any budget guarantee on your preschool enrollment loss. That ISFIS new authority tool shows you your regular program impact on your budget and on your taxpayers. And then with the qualified instructional supplement, connect and share your increased costs to engage students, whether that's in a hybrid or virtual instruction, and how do you follow public health guidelines. Your RSAI resources to help, of course, watch your email and website as new calls to action will show up there. Don't forget to keep us informed of contacts and relationships you and your team members have with legislators. If you're looking for a content delivery support to help your teachers, whether in the classroom or virtually, we suggest you look into BoardWorks. They're one of our corporate sponsors, and RSAI also welcomes Carl A. Nelson Construction as our second corporate sponsor. You can find out more about them on the RSAI website. And most of all, thank you for your advocacy efforts on behalf of the students in your school. We'll see you next week.